Let me be straight with you. Social Security is in serious trouble, and most people have no idea how bad things actually are. We are not talking about minor adjustments or small tweaks. We are talking about a system that is heading toward a wall at full speed, and the people driving the car keep arguing about the radio station instead of hitting the brakes. I have been covering this topic for a while now. Every single time I bring it up, people push back. They say I am being dramatic. They say the government will figure it out. They say Social Security has survived before, and it will survive again. Fine, I hear you. But let me walk you through what is actually happening right now, and you can decide for yourself whether I am being dramatic or whether the situation is genuinely this bad. Because here is the thing. The numbers do not lie. The projections do not lie. What experts are saying right now is not good, and it keeps getting worse with every report that comes out. Anxiety is already setting in. There is a headline going around right now that reads something along the lines of Social Security concerns are shaking workers and retirees to their core. And honestly, that tracks with everything I am seeing and hearing. People are scared. Workers who are decades away from retirement are questioning whether Social Security will even exist by the time they get there. Retirees who are currently collecting benefits are wondering whether their monthly check is going to shrink dramatically. Both groups have legitimate reasons to be worried. I was recently sitting down with a friend of mine. He is trying to figure out his retirement situation, and he asked me a very simple question. Should he factor Social Security into his retirement plan? Is it actually going to be there in 25 years? And honestly, I did not have a clean answer for him, because the truth is, nobody does. What I could tell him is that the situation is deteriorating faster than most official projections initially suggested. What I could tell him is that the people running these numbers are now painting a darker picture than they were even a couple of years ago. What I could tell him is that relying entirely on Social Security for retirement income is a gamble that is getting riskier by the day. That is not me being pessimistic. That is just reading what is in front of us. The cut nobody wants to talk about here is where things get genuinely alarming. For people who are currently collecting Social Security benefits, a major benefit cut is not some distant theoretical scenario. It is a real, projected outcome that experts are now putting a number on. Not long ago, the estimates were that beneficiaries could see a cut somewhere around 22 to 23% if Congress does nothing and the trust fund runs dry. That was already bad enough. A 22% cut is devastating for anyone who depends on those monthly payments to cover basic living expenses. But now the projections have gotten worse. What we are hearing now is that the cut could land somewhere between 27 and 29%. Think about what that actually means for someone living on Social Security. If you are getting $1,000 a month right now, a 29% cut means you would only receive around $710. That is $290 gone every single month. That is not a rounding error. That is grocery money. That is utility bills. For millions of people, that is the difference between keeping a roof over their head or not. And again, this is not a fringe prediction. This is coming from serious researchers and analysts who study these numbers professionally. The situation is worse than we thought, and it is moving in the wrong direction. A message from inside the system. I want to share something with you that came from a community member who commented on one of my previous videos. Now, I cannot personally verify every single claim this person made, but what they said aligns closely with things I have been hearing from multiple different sources. So I want to put it out there for you to consider. This person claimed to have worked at the Social Security Administration for 21 years. They wrote that their division was recently given a very specific set of instructions. Their boss told the entire team that they needed to do everything in their power to discourage people from claiming benefits early. According to this person, the internal estimate from their office alone is that benefits will be reduced by at least 27% once the program hits insolvency. They also added something that I found particularly striking. They said that with all the layoffs happening because of artificial intelligence, insolvency is expected to arrive sooner than the end of 2032. Now here is why that comment stuck with me. Because around the same time the comment came in, I started getting direct messages from other people saying something very similar. People were telling me that they felt like the Social Security Administration was actively trying to talk them out of claiming benefits early. They were being encouraged to wait until age 70 to collect their maximum benefit. On the surface, waiting until 70 makes financial sense for a lot of people. Your monthly payment is higher if you delay. That is not new information. But the reason behind the push, according to what people are telling me, is more troubling than that. The thinking, apparently, is that the more people who start collecting benefits right now, the faster the program burns through its reserves. Delay as many people as possible, buy the system a little more time. Whether that is the actual strategy or not, I cannot say with certainty. But when you hear it from multiple independent sources, it starts to feel less like conspiracy and more like policy. Hey, real quick, if you are finding this useful, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. Why artificial intelligence is accelerating the problem. Let me explain something that does not get enough attention in these Social Security conversations. Most people understand that Social Security is funded through payroll taxes. Every time someone earns a paycheck, a portion of that money goes into the Social Security Trust Fund. That is the basic structure of how the whole thing works. Now here is the problem. Artificial intelligence is replacing workers at a scale we have never seen before. Companies are implementing automated systems, machine learning tools, and robotic processes that allow them to do the same amount of work with far fewer human employees. When those employees get laid off, they stop paying payroll taxes. And when the number of people paying into the system drops, the amount of money flowing into the trust fund drops with it. This is not a hypothetical. This is happening right now. Entire industries are shedding workers because automation is cheaper and faster. The jobs are not coming back. They are being permanently replaced by systems that do not have paychecks, do not pay Social Security taxes, and do not contribute a single dollar to the retirement fund that millions of Americans are counting on. So when you combine a shrinking workforce with a growing retiree population, the math becomes brutal very quickly. More people pulling money out, fewer people putting money in. The gap between those two realities is what creates the insolvency problem, and AI is making that gap wider every single year. This is something that the people designing Social Security decades ago simply could not have anticipated. The entire system was built around the assumption that the workforce would keep growing and that payroll tax revenue would keep rising. Those assumptions no longer hold. The ground has shifted underneath the program. The proposals on the table. So what are lawmakers actually talking about doing? Let me walk you through some of what is circulating right now, because there are a few different ideas being floated, and none of them are painless. One proposal that recently got some attention came from a Washington think tank. The idea was to cap annual Social Security benefits at $100,000 per year. The reasoning behind this is that the trust fund is facing a serious shortfall, and capping benefits at the top end could help slow the bleeding. If you are receiving more than $100,000 per year in Social Security benefits, which a relatively small percentage of people are, your benefit would be capped at that level. Now, the pushback on this is understandable. People who are receiving more than that have been paying into the system their entire working lives with the expectation of receiving a certain level of benefit. Pulling the rug out from under them now feels like a broken promise, and legally and politically, it is an absolute mess. But here is what that same research pointed to. Social Security is looking at a funding shortfall that could arrive as early as 2032. If Congress does nothing between now and then, retirees are looking at approximately a 28% reduction in monthly benefits. That is the default outcome if nobody acts. So the question is not whether something painful is going to happen. The question is which painful thing we are going to choose. Another piece of the conversation involves the payroll tax cap. Right now, there is an income ceiling above which you stop paying Social Security taxes. This year, that number sits around $171,000, and it gets adjusted for inflation each year. A lot of people argue that lifting or eliminating that cap would bring significantly more money into the system. High earners would pay more, and the trust fund would get a boost. The counter-argument is that those same high earners would then be entitled to larger benefits down the road, which partially offsets the gain. There is also the political reality that raising taxes on anyone is a fight that lawmakers are not eager to pick. What happens if nobody acts? I want to be blunt about this because I think people are still not taking it seriously enough. The default scenario, the one where Congress does nothing and just lets the clock run out, ends with automatic benefit cuts that nobody voted for and nobody can easily reverse. That is not a policy choice. That is an institutional failure. The Senior Citizens League, which has been tracking this issue closely, put out a statement that was pretty direct about the situation. They said the crisis is roughly 7 years away, probably arriving around 2033. And when their representatives visited congressional offices to talk about this, what they found was deeply discouraging. Nothing meaningful is being done. No serious legislative effort is underway to address the problem before it becomes a catastrophe. The reason for that, according to what they heard, is that members of Congress are simply not hearing from seniors about this issue in any significant volume. The political pressure that would normally force lawmakers to act is not there. And without that pressure, lawmakers are doing what politicians do when something is hard and unpopular. They are waiting. They are hoping the problem resolves itself or at least lands on the next administration's desk. That brings us to the options that Congress would eventually face if they wait long enough. You are basically looking at three paths: raise payroll taxes on current workers, cut benefits for current and future retirees, or do some combination of both. None of these are popular. All of them have real consequences for real people. And the longer Congress waits, the more dramatic those changes will need to be to make up the difference. Hey, if this is hitting home for you, take a second to like this, leave a comment below, and subscribe. It genuinely helps. The kick the can problem. Here is something that frustrates me more than almost anything else in this whole discussion. The Social Security funding problem is not new. This has been a known issue for decades. Every administration that has come through Washington has been aware of it. Every president has had access to the same projections, the same actuarial reports, the same warnings from the same experts. And every single administration has done the same thing. They have looked at the problem, recognized that fixing it would be expensive and unpopular, and decided to leave it for the next guy to deal with. That is not a Republican thing or a Democrat thing. That is a political cowardice thing that cuts across party lines and goes back further than most people want to admit. You want to blame the current administration? Fine. There is plenty of blame to go around. But the Biden administration did not fix it either. The first Trump administration did not fix it. Obama did not fix it. Bush did not fix it. Clinton got close to some reforms, but ultimately the structural problem remained. This has been building for a very long time, and every administration has added to it by choosing short-term political comfort over long-term fiscal responsibility. The results that we are now significantly closer to the cliff than we would have been if any of those administrations had acted with urgency 20 or 30 years ago. The debt is due, the bill is coming, and the people who will pay it are the ones who can least afford to. The real human cost of a 29% cut. I want to spend a minute on what this actually looks like for people on the ground, because I think the percentage numbers can make it feel abstract. So let me make it concrete. The average Social Security benefit right now is somewhere around $1,800 per month, give or take, depending on your work history and when you claimed. A 29% cut on that average benefit means you are losing over $500 every single month. That is $6,000 a year. Gone. For someone living in a major city where rents are high, that could mean the difference between staying in their apartment or being forced to move. For someone in a rural area with limited transportation options, that could mean choosing between medication and food. For someone whose spouse has already passed away and who has no other income source, that could mean genuine crisis. And these are not edge cases. The majority of Social Security recipients have limited savings and limited alternative income. The program was designed to be a safety net, and for tens of millions of people, it functions as much more than that. It is their primary financial lifeline. A nearly 30% cut to that lifeline is not an inconvenience. It is a potentially devastating blow to people who have no way to absorb it. This is why the conversation matters. This is why I keep bringing it back to the human reality rather than just the policy debate. Because behind every percentage point in those projections, there are real people making real decisions about how to survive. The idea of eliminating Social Security. Entirely. I want to address something that is starting to circulate more seriously in policy discussions. There are voices now who are arguing that trying to patch Social Security is a losing strategy, that the program is structurally flawed, and that the right move is to phase it out entirely and replace it with something different. The argument goes something like this. If the money that workers currently pay in payroll taxes had instead been invested in diversified market portfolios over the course of a career, the average person would end up with significantly more money in retirement than Social Security currently provides. The stock market, over long time horizons, tends to outperform the returns that Social Security delivers. So in theory, a fully privatized or individually managed retirement system could produce better outcomes for most workers. That argument is not crazy on its face. There is real math behind it. But it falls apart in several important ways when you look at how people actually behave with money. Most people do not invest consistently. Most people do not have the financial literacy to manage a diversified portfolio through multiple market cycles. Most people, when given the option between having money now and saving it for retirement, choose having money now. The mandatory nature of Social Security, the fact that it is taken out of your paycheck before you ever see it, is actually one of its most important features. It forces participation from people who would otherwise not save anything. And then there is the transition problem. Even if you decided tomorrow that you were going to phase out Social Security and replace it with private accounts, what do you do about the people who are currently collecting? You cannot pull the rug out from under them. They have been paying in for decades. They have organized their entire lives around the expectation of receiving those benefits. Any transition away from the current system would take generations to complete. And during that entire transition period, you would be running two systems simultaneously, which is enormously expensive. So the conversation about eliminating Social Security is a lot more complicated than it sounds when people throw it out as a quick fix. Like and subscribe if you want to stay ahead of this stuff. More is coming, and you do not want to miss it. What people are not asking loudly enough. One of the things the Senior Citizens League specifically pointed out is that the political inaction on Social Security is at least partly a reflection of the fact that seniors are not being loud enough about it. Congress responds to constituent pressure. That is how the system works. When lawmakers hear from enough people about a specific issue, they start paying attention to it. The problem is that Social Security reform is complicated. The solutions are painful, and most people would rather not think about it until they have to. That instinct is completely understandable, but it is also exactly the kind of collective avoidance that allows a crisis to grow until it becomes unmanageable. If you are someone who is currently collecting benefits, or if you are within 10 or 15 years of retirement, this is not a problem you can afford to ignore. The decisions that get made or not made in the next several years will directly determine what your monthly income looks like in retirement. That is worth paying attention to. That is worth calling your representative about. That is worth showing up to town halls for. The people making decisions in Washington are not going to act out of pure altruism. They are going to act when enough people make it impossible for them not to. And right now, not enough people are making enough noise. The retirement planning reality check. Let me come back to the conversation I was having with my friend, because I think it represents where a lot of people are right now. He wanted to know whether he could count on Social Security. And the honest answer is that you should plan as if it might be significantly reduced, not as if it is going to be exactly what the calculator tells you today. That is not saying Social Security will disappear entirely. It is saying that responsible retirement planning right now means treating your projected Social Security benefit as a floor that might be lower than expected, not a ceiling you can build around. What does that look like practically? It means if you have access to an employer-matched retirement plan, you contribute enough to get the full match at minimum. It means if you have the ability to open an individual retirement account, you should be doing that. It means if you are self-employed, you need to be even more aggressive about putting money aside, because you do not have an employer pushing you toward any kind of structured savings. None of this is revolutionary advice, but the urgency behind it is different now than it was 10 years ago. The timeline on Social Security is getting shorter. The projected cuts are getting larger. The political will to fix it before it breaks is not growing fast enough. All of those things together mean that personal savings and alternative income sources matter more than they ever have. The question of who retirement is even for. Here is something worth thinking about that does not come up enough in these conversations. Retirement as a concept is relatively new in historical terms. The idea that you work for a few decades and then stop working entirely and live off savings and government support for another 20 or 30 years is a 20th century invention. And it was built around life expectancy numbers and workforce dynamics that no longer apply. People are living longer. Medical technology keeps improving. The average retirement today can last 20 or 25 years, sometimes more. That is a very long time to fund without income. Social Security was never designed to carry the full weight of that. It was designed to be a supplement, not a complete income replacement. But for millions of people, it became exactly that. Because the rest of the retirement infrastructure, pensions, personal savings, employer-sponsored plans, never developed in a way that reached everyone. So when we talk about fixing Social Security, we are also really talking about a much bigger question. How does a society that has fundamentally changed decide to take care of people who can no longer work? That question does not have an easy answer. But it is the question underneath all the specific policy debates, and it is worth naming it explicitly. The answer we have been defaulting to, which is to ignore the structural problem and hope the next administration figures it out, is not working. At some point, a real conversation has to happen about what retirement security actually looks like in a country where people live into their 80s and 90s, where automation is reshaping the workforce, and where the programs designed for a very different era are straining under the weight of new realities. The blame game is not going to save anyone. I want to address the political finger-pointing directly because I see it constantly in comments and conversations around this topic. People blame one party. People blame one president. People act like Social Security's problem started with whoever they already did not like. That is not accurate, and it is not useful. The reality is that this problem was allowed to grow across multiple decades and multiple administrations of both parties. Every single time a president or a Congress had the opportunity to make meaningful structural reforms, they looked at the political cost and decided it was not worth it. That is a bipartisan failure. That is an institutional failure. Pretending otherwise does not solve anything. What would actually be useful is recognizing that the system needs reform that is going to be genuinely painful for someone, probably for many people, and that pointing fingers about who caused the problem does not get us any closer to the solution. The math does not care about party affiliation. The trust fund runs out on approximately the same schedule regardless of how you vote. The people who are going to be most affected by this are the ones who have the fewest alternatives. They cannot make up a 29% income cut by pulling from savings they do not have. They cannot go back to work if their bodies will not cooperate. They are going to bear the cost of decades of political inaction, and that is not fair. But fairness has nothing to do with math. Last call before we wrap up. Like, comment, and subscribe. It keeps this conversation going and helps more people find this information. Where do we go from here? So what is actually going to happen? Honestly, nobody knows for certain. The most likely scenario, based on historical patterns, is that Congress will continue to avoid the issue until it becomes absolutely unavoidable. Probably somewhere in the late 2020s or early 2030s, when the projections become impossible to ignore and the trust fund depletion date is close enough to see clearly, there will be some kind of emergency legislative action. That action will probably involve some combination of benefit adjustments, tax changes, and possibly some form of means testing that reduces or eliminates benefits for higher-income retirees. It will be politically brutal. It will make a lot of people angry, and it will probably still not fully solve the long-term structural issues. In the meantime, the people who are already collecting benefits are going to spend years living with the anxiety of not knowing whether their check is going to shrink and by how much. The people who are approaching retirement are going to have to make planning decisions under enormous uncertainty. And the younger workers who are decades away from retirement are going to watch this unfold and draw their own conclusions about whether to trust the system with their money at all. None of that is a good outcome. All of it was avoidable with earlier action, and all of it is where we are headed unless something changes significantly in how Washington approaches this problem. The bigger worry, honestly, is not just Social Security in isolation. It is what this tells us about the capacity of the political system to make hard decisions before they become crises. If we cannot manage a problem this well documented, this long predicted, and this clearly consequential, what does that say about our ability to handle the other large structural challenges that are building in the background? That is a question worth sitting with, because Social Security is not the only thing that needs fixing. It is just the one that is closest to breaking. What I know for sure is this. The people who are going to be most protected through all of this are the ones who are paying attention right now, who are adjusting their plans accordingly, who are not sitting back and assuming the government will make it right. Hope for the best. Plan for something significantly worse. That is the most honest advice I can give you based on everything we know today. And keep watching. Keep asking questions. Keep pushing your representatives to have this conversation publicly. Because the loudest thing happening in Washington right now on Social Security is silence. And silence is not going to save anyone's retirement.